Welcome to our workshop. The topic of this one is programming and the Kotlin programming language. If at any point you have questions, please feel free to drop those in the chat or wait for a question break and voice them out loud. We'll start with a little bit of background information about the team. We are a 10th year team made up of 9 members this year. We've won a handful of awards throughout our past few seasons, previously winning every award in the entire history of the team. We've been around the block a couple of times, won a couple of things. We've got some experience, essentially. The purpose of these workshops is to take a little bit of time to take what we've learned from all of our experience and impart that onto you. So give rookie teams and rookie members a little bit of a jump start so you can spend more time doing the fun parts of FTC, the building the robots, doing the outreach, winning awards, rather than trying to learn all of this throughout your season. Today's workshop, as I said, is about programming and the Kotlin programming language. We'll start off with a little bit of general information. So the first thing we're going to cover here is version control, which keeps track of your code, stores it online, allows you to go back to older versions if needed. So if you make updates to your code and you find it doesn't work as well anymore, you can always go back to an old version without having to remember exactly what you did, because every version of it is saved somewhere on the internet, and you can always go back and reboot it to that version. Some of the tools that are used to do this are GitHub, which is what we use personally and is used sort of a lot in the industry. So that is a super helpful tool that we definitely enjoy using. And then there is also GitLab and Atlassian Git as options that we don't know as much about, but are definitely out there for you to use. There are also a handful of open source FTC libraries, which are essentially pre-written code out there for various purposes that you can use instead of writing every single bit of code yourself. These are super important, not just for more complicated algorithms, but for very basic things. For example, all of your basic FTC hardware, your motors, your servos, all your sensors, those are contained within FTC libraries that are out there to download, because it wouldn't make sense for every single FTC team to write out individual code classes for all of their various hardware. So some of the libraries that are out there, other than the basic ones, are Roadrunner, which is used for odometry, a position tracking system. So that saves you from having to do all of that math on your own and having to transfer that into movement that your robot can use. You can just use Roadrunner, and there are tons of instructions on how to use that. There's EasyOpenCV, which is a vision library, which has some variable functionality. So you can detect color, you can detect the position of a certain contour, lots of different ways to use that. That's what we mainly use for randomization at the beginning of the game. Then there is also TensorFlow, which we've used in the past and found didn't work for our team, but it may very well work for yours, depending on what you're trying to do. So that is an image recognition model, which can be trained by images that you put in there. There are a limited number of trials, but can work if you have a distinct enough image, and will then recognize whatever picture you trained it on out there on the field, so you can also use that theoretically for randomization if it's something that allows you to put pictures out there. There is FTC Dashboard, which allows you to view the status of different variables while a program is in progress. So you can hook your control hub up to a computer and watch as variables, say the position or velocity of a certain motor at a given time, watch how those progress throughout your program. It'll even graph it for you so you can look back at it afterward, have visual data on what it is that your program's doing. And then there is FTC lib, which is a big old chunk library that essentially piles everything you could need for FTC into one place. So you can find all kinds of different code for different things that you might need to do, as well as instructions on how to do it on FTC lib. And then there is a larger FTC Discord server for just teams worldwide, which is unofficial, but a lot of teams use it to post things that they're working on, which might include libraries that could be helpful for your team. So, Alex just dropped a bunch of links in the chat there. I think one of those is the Discord server invitation. So if you would like to join that, it's not obviously something that you have to do, but it could be a useful place to find resources. Now, downloading the code onto your robot obviously is not only helpful, but essential if you want your robot to function, which I would think that if you're here, you probably do. So the usual way that you do that is with a wire from your computer onto the control hub on your robot. So that is a USB-C connector, which obviously if you're using a wire, you're going to have to be able to do that. So yeah, make sure you have one of those on hand. And then if you're using Android Studio, which is the software that we use, you can use an ADB or wireless connection through your computer in order to download without having to plug in. Saves you a little bit of time. There's a link there on the slide that Alex just posted in the chat that will walk you through how to set that up and use that in your situation. Then, of course, you're going to encounter times during the season where you're going to need to get some help from somebody. Every team does. So there are FTC Discord servers. Again, that's the general one, and then there might be one for your region, depending on where you are, but you'll have to interact with more teams in your area to get access to that if there is one. So those are a great place to go where, people are on there all the time, just looking to help you. And then there's FTC Docs, which is an official source from First that walks you through how to do everything that there is to do with First, just official documentation for anything and everything that's out there. The FTC SDK Java docs, which are essentially embedded notes in the code that tell you what different classes, different bits of code are all doing. So that is more precise on how to work with various pieces of software throughout your season. And then there's good old Google or your search engine of choice, which obviously, if you look up an error, you're probably going to find someone who has encountered it before and quite possibly figure out how they fixed it, especially if you're on a forum page like Stack Overflow where people are asking for help. It's always a great resource. Do not shy away from just looking things up from time to time. Then there are library websites. So if you're using one of those software libraries that we mentioned on the previous slide, those all have official websites with instructions on how to set those up, how to use them, how to tune them for your robot, and how to troubleshoot if you're having one of a number of common issues. So the official source is always a great place to go if you're having an issue. And then, of course, ask other teams, ask around at competitions to see if anyone's having the same problem you are. You can work through it together. Reach out to us. Feel free to email us. We always love helping people out. Just find another team or other FTC participants in your area, and they will most likely be willing to help you. FTC has a wonderful culture of great professionalism. That means that you can always find help if you ask for it. Now we reach our first question break. Again, during any of these question breaks, you can speak your question out loud or you can type it in the chat. We are watching the chat in order to be able to answer those questions. Please ask questions if you have them. It only gets more complicated from here. Got a thanks for the links in the chat. We will definitely, we can send out a PDF of these slides afterwards so everyone still has access to those links. Do you have a GitHub page? Is another question in the chat. We do. We're on GitHub under the Bionic Tigers. That has all of our past repositories, I believe, except for the most recent one that are public. You can look at all of our code for that. So definitely feel free. Otherwise, GitHub, like I said, is a great resource for us. We'd be happy to walk, at a different time. Happy to show you how to use it. But yeah, our code from past seasons is out there. don't have any more questions, then I guess we can move on.
All right, so now we're going to go over some of the basics about Kotlin. So what is Kotlin? Kotlin is a programming language that's new and it's growing rapidly. It's made by JetBrains and it's used by Android. It's interoperable with Java, meaning that Java code will still work with Kotlin code. It's an inferred language, which means that it automatically assigns variable types to variables without you having to specify while you're writing your code. Um, it's also designed to be very readable, which makes it easier to figure out what code does just by looking at it, especially if you're working in a team and you have to look at somebody else's code. It's also recognized as one of the main languages used in FTC, and it also works on the Java virtual machine, which allows it to run on anything that can run Java, and users can still use Java libraries and tools while writing code in Kotlin. So why should you choose Kotlin? So Kotlin is very easy to read and write. It's also a very easy language to learn because of the simplified syntax compared to Java, which is very syntax heavy, which means you need extra code than you might need in Kotlin because it's much simpler. Um, Kotlin also has lots of measures in place to make sure you don't make mistakes. So things like inferred types for type-related errors and null safety for null pointer exceptions. Kotlin also has lots of additional features like null safety and resources like the documentation and tutorials that's on their official site. It's also easy to get help with Kotlin in the FTC community. Many people can give you help with Kotlin related problems on the FTC Discord server. So real world applications of Kotlin, it's largely used for mobile app development, which is a very relevant and profitable market. So it's good to know and to have experience in if you're looking to go into something like that. The industry standard is slowly changing from Java to Kotlin, and many Java-based applications are being changed to Kotlin. And actually, Kotlin is now the preferred language for Android development at Google. And then Kotlin is also being used in the field of data science. So how can you learn Kotlin? There's lots of different ways. Kotlin provides lots of documents on the basics of Kotlin on their official website, which I think we just put in the chat. It can also be taught for free on different platforms like Code Academy and JetBrains Academy. It's one specific thing that you can learn with is Kotlin Cones, which is an interactive step-by-step tutorial for learning Kotlin where you actually write code during the tutorial and learn how to use it. And then also you can ask questions on the FTC Discord and also ask your sponsors. So Kotlin tools. Kotlin works on lots of different IDEs, which are integrated development environments, which is the software where you write your code. Um, so IDEs like Android Studio, which is what we recommend and we use because it's made specifically for Android development, and you can also use ADB with it. Um, and then other ones like IntelliJ and Visual Studio Code will also work with it just fine. Kotlin also has build tools like Gradle and Maven, which let you add external libraries to your code base, which helps you save some time. So there is a little bit of setup you have to do for the build tools for Kotlin with the FTC SDK so that it can work. It can be a little bit complicated, but you only have to set it up once. And there are lots of different guides on how to do it, but we recommend the one on the official First Docs website, which is in the chat, I think. You can also use a GitHub template and make a copy of it, which is also a simple way to set it up. So here's a little overview of Kotlin versus Java. Kotlin's very easy to learn, and it's newer and more readable because of the simpler syntax. It's also gaining popularity quickly, but Java is more widely used and therefore has more resources. It's also currently the industry standard, however, that is slowly changing towards Kotlin a little bit. But both of them will control your robot just fine, and they're both text-based. Right, questions?
All right, we had a question in the chat. Do any of your team members come in with no programming experience? I would say for us, not very often. We have a very robust middle school robotics program at Loveland. So we do have most of our team members coming in having already programmed at least a little bit, who are going toward the programming team. But it definitely has happened in the past. We've had teams with our team members with no programming experience or only blocks as programming experience. And what we found is that Kotlin is very easy to learn for anyone who understands the basic fundamentals, um, or even who doesn't. It's easy enough to teach. So it's that's one of the benefits is that it's easy for everybody to learn, regardless of whether or not they programmed before.
So, Jamie, kind of building on that question, if you do have somebody who comes in with limited programming experience, what kind of freshman classes do we offer at Loveland that we recommend kids take?
So at Loveland, we do have a number of computer science based classes that we are very lucky to have. I know a lot of robotics kids, I think, have been through our Fundamentals of IT course, which teaches mostly computer hardware, but a little bit of web development. There is also an Intro to Web Dev course that's offered through a local community college that a lot of people take, and a computer programming basics course, which I believe is offered through our Project Lead the Way program and taught by one of our engineering teachers at the high school.
I would also say that AP Computer Science is a very useful course since it's in Java and Java and Kotlin are so similar, you can apply a lot of those skills.
If you're in the United States and you're at a school that offers AP courses, then AP Computer Science A specifically, is a super useful course. Got a question again in the chat. Is there any extra instructions we should do when we start programming with Kotlin for FTC? Other than, as Aaron mentioned earlier, setting Kotlin up with your build tools, which again, there's a link on that slide for a tutorial. There's nothing in addition that you have to do that you wouldn't have to do with any other programming language. Feel free to ask a follow-up question if I didn't quite get what you're saying there. But as far as I'm aware, no, there's nothing extra outside of what we've already mentioned.
All right, so I'm going to be covering some of the major differences between Java and Kotlin. So a standard library is essentially just tools that come with the language pre-installed that make your life easier to develop. So some of those include array list, arrays, dictionaries, hash maps, strings, anything built into the language. So a major difference between Kotlin and Java is the size of the standard library and the simplicity of it. So Kotlin builds on top of Java's standard library by making it more expansive, and it also makes it much simpler to work with and easier to understand. So lambdas are in both Kotlin and Java. In Kotlin, they're a lot easier to do and a big part of the language. So lambdas are essentially throwaway functions, which means that you can use them without having to declare them. So if you look at the code examples in Java, you have to first make an interface and then put that into a function. In Kotlin, you can just do it directly in the function. And what we do is, if you look at the Kotlin section, we have a compare function, which we can pass in something like an array or any type of that. And then we can pass in a function which can take the first element and the second element and just step through it and compare them to check if A is greater than B. So collections are a part of the standard library. Collections are groups of data such as arrays, array lists, maps, hash maps, or anything like that. And below is the difference between how you create an array list. So in Java, it's a bit different than Kotlin. Kotlin also has a lot of methods built on top of the arrays, which makes it easier to work with. As you can see, we can filter numbers directly on the array. We don't have to cast it to a stream and then back to an array like we do in Java. And that's also an example of lambdas. So another difference is strings. Strings in Kotlin are a lot more simple. As you can see, we have a format string, which essentially means we can slot variables into the string at different places. So in Java, we have to have specifiers, which is the %d and %s, and then we can put in the variables. In Kotlin, we can just do it directly in the string. We don't have to do anything special, which is what the $sign and then the variable name after is. And a massive difference between Java and Kotlin is null safety. So null is essentially just something that doesn't exist. And the example in the code that is shown is an OpenCV detection. So we try and get the detection. And in Java, we have to check if it exists. But if we don't do that, Java will still let us compile, which means that if it doesn't exist when we're running the code, it could throw an error and break the entire system. Kotlin won't let us do that, and we have to explicitly define that we know it's a null, or it could be nullable, and then we can work off of that. It won't let us do operations on a null without declaring that we know it will be a null. And then I know that was a little complicated, so if you have any questions, feel free to let me know in chat.
Got a question in the chat. What's the difference in the boilerplate code between the two? Alex, I think you should take that one.
Yeah. So Kotlin has very little boilerplate, like almost none. Java, you have to do a lot of stuff before you can actually get what you want. So Kotlin simplifies it and makes it significantly easier, in my opinion, to understand.
Question in the chat, is there any big differences for using libraries between Java and Kotlin? Answer to that is not at all. Any libraries that are written for Java, which is all of them in FTC, can also work perfectly fine in Kotlin. There is no functional difference between the two in that regard. All right, that is all we have for you today. Thank you so much for coming. Feel free, of course, to contact us with any questions or issues that you may have throughout your season. We would absolutely love to help you. We can be reached on Twitter and Instagram at Bionic Tigers FTC. But we are more reliably found at bionictigers10464 at gmail.com if you're looking to actually contact us.